Hi there. So, I'm going to be doing a track breakdown today. I've chosen the track Awake, which is off of my EP Rebirth, which just came out about a week ago. And I'll talk a little bit about the origin of the inspiration and the stages in terms of the composition, how things went, when things stalled, how I got through certain hurdles. Um, I'll be talking a little bit about the instruments and the sounds, the techniques I used, and I've opened up the original session here in Ableton. So we'll be able to go through all the layers. I'll talk a little bit about tricks that I use on several tracks, um, and yeah, we'll just sort of go through it from start to finish. Um, so taking you back to when I first started this track, it was about a year to 2 years ago. I can't quite remember, but it was quite a while ago. I was living in South London in Peckham, and one day, I'm not sure why, but I was inspired to write, and using my Prophet synth, which is sitting over here, um, I started fiddling around with some chord shapes, and very early on, I was thinking about this idea of a combination of a an arpeggio pattern and a kick drum. That was sort of the origin of a feeling, I guess, that I wanted to have a song build around. Um, and to be totally honest, I did want to go for something very beautiful, very accessible in terms of um, the kind of chordal choices, but at the same time, I wanted to make something um, that could be complex. It could evolve. It could be a sort of challenge in terms of how can I make these harmonies really like flesh them out and make them very immersive and very interesting. Um, so I first came up with this arpeggio pattern on the Prophet, and it was using a sound that I programmed ages ago, and I've come back to very often as a starting point sound because it has a very pure, clean sort of almost Wurlitzer type keyboard sound to it, and it can be a great starting point, especially for a sound like this arpeggio. What I found was you can put your hands on the keyboards and you can sort of um, try out different chord shapes, and you see how the arpeggio reacts to that. And why it's quite nice is because you get unexpected results. If you use less notes than, say, 4 notes, and it's a 16th note pattern, then you might get a pattern that kind of shifts over the bar as it moves. And that's basically what happened with this sound. So I can play it in isolation real quick. So it is 4 notes, but there's a rest, which is very key. That rest is huge because what it does is it makes it kind of more like 5 notes. And so as you hear, well, you don't quite hear because there isn't a metronome to show it, but I'll play in a second with the kick drum and you will hear the pattern shifts as the track goes, and it makes something like constantly changing and fresh feeling, not really stuck in a grid. Um, yeah, the notes that are going on here, it's basically a major chord, but what's played is the first, second, third, and then the major seventh. So instead of a 1 3 5 7 sort of typical 4 note arpeggio, you get this more clustery, dreamlike sort of texture. So that was the beginning chord, And if I play it with the kick drum, which I added, I can play the kick drum quick. So the kick is very very simple but very particular. It's a very short kick. There isn't a tone there. The click is very, I would say it's quite subtle, very round, kind of heartbeat kick from Kick 2, which is one of my go-to plugins for making kick drums. So I put those two together, and what you get is the following. So as you hear, it's constantly moving. It does come back to its original place after a certain amount of time, but the ear doesn't really trace that. You know, it just sort of feels like it's free arpeggio moving along. The other part that was key in this was adding the bass, the sub bass, and this gives the kind of foundation and the warmth and the body to the low end in the track, and it's the third ingredient in the opening phrase, the main opening phrase. There's 3 ingredients. That's the third one. The bass comes from a plugin I use all the time for sub bass, which is the FabFilter 1. I basically use the subsonic. I do some tweaking on that, but that's more or less all I use that one plugin for, just that one sound, and that's completely fine. A lot of, you know, that's the case with a lot of full instruments even. I mean, a keyboard of mine in the past, I basically just used it for one synth patch, which made it very inconvenient because the keyboard was absolutely massive. But this is the sub bass on its own. And also what I'm doing in the sub bass here is I'm actually adding an octave to the tone, to the bass note. This probably is audible if we listen to it. This is just the bass, the low tone. Actually, that's incorrect. So that's me writing top instead of, yeah, that's incorrect though. Basically, that's the same tone doubled, so it's a bit misleading. But it is something that I do very often with this bass sound, because what it does is it basically just helps the sound kind of cut through more in the mix, because it's very round, this tone, so often it can get lost on speakers if it's just that lower octave. The other thing I do is I add saturation. I did this later in this track, and that brings out a little bit more of the sound as well, like the higher harmonics. That in particular, when songs get more, you know, either aggressive or more energetic, that's a great technique to use. So the 3 together sounds like this. So that was basically the blueprint of the track, that first whole phrase. We go through all the harmonies, and the phrase ends, and then I knew I wanted to stick with that. I wanted to keep it minimal. I wanted to just sort of have that melodic element of the arp going, but then to add to that and have some more rhythmic interest. So then it was about looking into certain sounds that could complement this groove, and what sort of sound world I wanted to explore in terms of the percussion. The first thing I was using or went to was the sound of a rim shot, and in addition to that, a sound of wind that actually is processed a bit with a tremulation or tremulator effect, and that comes from Sound Toys here. So I'll show you those two things, and it's a very subtle element, but it adds a lot to the atmosphere. So the rim shot here, I'll play this section so you can have a listen. So simple, just the rim shot and that evolving. What's nice about that sound is that it's very much evolving because it's wind. So the 16th pattern almost feels like there's kind of like an EQ that's sort of shifting to show different parts of the like white noise in a way, and that sounds like that on its own. So as we get further into the track, there's another moment of rhythmic, I'd say like an injection of energy in terms of the rhythm. And here it definitely evolves quite a bit more quite quickly. There's multiple elements that all come in together, but they're kind of all complementary elements. So it doesn't feel like tons of elements, but there are actually about 4 different layers that are here in terms of the rhythm, and I'll break it down very quick so you can have a listen. The first thing I add here is this click sound. And that click sound complements the rim shot. When a track is going, if you just always only have that single layered rim shot throughout, it will start to get a bit dull, and this just sort of gives it an added emphasis. It sort of keeps it alive and keeps it changing, keeps it dynamic, which is very important. So on top of that, there's this offbeat hat sound, and if I were to play that in isolation, it's just this simple. So we have the click, we have the offbeat hat, and then we have this texture, which is the most important part of the section. Again, an offbeat kind of sound. There's the sidechain on it, which I didn't mention before, but that's key on so many of these elements. The sidechain is all listening to the kick drum, so when the kick drum hits, these elements turn down their volume, and then they come louder after the kick drum sounds. So it creates that pumping kind of swaying effect. And the final sound is this one down here. So those are all these broken up sounds placed differently in the grid, but if you play them together, you get this all together sounding like so. And then with the kick drum. So the groove is really coming together at this point. At the end of this, I got to a point where I was stuck. I didn't know how to really go further with the track. But that's where I came up with the idea of bringing vocals in, not in the kind of sense of normal singing, but more in the sense of samples and manipulating them and creating harmonies which will really bring a lot of the emotion out in the song. This came mainly from one single sample, and what I do often is very, very often is I will take one sound and I will just manipulate it like crazy, or I will pitch it. And that's sort of what's happening here. So there's this main vocal sample, which I'll play right now. So that, I mean, has a ton of reverb on it. It has some sidechain, so you hear that pumping. It's also pitch shifted to fit in the key of the song. Then right after that, delayed and shifted to the right side, because that was on the left side, you have the same sound, but this is pitch shifted differently. And because it's vocals, when you pitch shift things, it really creates the sound almost of a different voice or a different take. You can really create, a sense for multiple people, multiple singers. So what you get here are these two bending sounds that are different pitches, but they sort of collide with each other, but they also are, very specifically thought for how they fit over the harmony. So the two together is like this. And then underneath that, there's another layer that enters here, and I can isolate these as well. So that one is cutting it even shorter. And pitch shifting it again and fading it in differently. So you just start to get the sense of like this really lush texture happening. It's worth noting the super long reverb, which is really like a fundamental part of the sound. And for that, I use the Valhalla vintage verb. So that one is, if I can show you, it's this one. So I believe it's that one. It's this one. So that one is the Valhalla vintage verb, which has been my go-to reverb for over 10 years actually. Ever since it came out, I fell in love with it. It's just got a certain sound to it that I feel so useful on so many different instances. And the one I've used here is basically a very long decay, 13.83 seconds, off of the preset long synth hall. The color's now, so it's a more modern sound as opposed to a vintage sound, but cleaner, and that's pumping into another sidechain. So that's another technique I like to do, is putting sidechain on the reverb, because if it wasn't, basically you lose the sense of the groove. The reverb would just drench everything and bleed through, but instead it's being controlled and it's fitting into the groove here. So those are those core vocals. I have another layer of vocals that are coming from the Eric Whitaker choir, and that's just a kind of pad, or more of a pedal note, I guess you could call it, kind of sound that's going on there from more of like a male tenor type singer voice, or choir voice. So again, there it's the sort of tonic and then second degree oscillating between the two, which is a very important interval in the track. It's from that original opening arpeggio, the 1 2 3 7, So that's there, and then in the choir as well. The middle section, when we get into that one's a bit, I mean, it's just basically setting the stage for the heart of the track to really emerge, which is this drop here that then takes over and is repeated for the rest of the track. I wanted to create like a sense of anticipation, and I brought in this new sound, which was basically the Prophet put through this Empress reverb pedal that I use very often. And it's a little bit of a syncopated pattern, chordal pattern, and you can have a listen here. Quite a few things that are adding to that, because actually I think it started out as just literally a drone. If I were to take all of these off, I can show you. Turn this down because I think this might be super loud. So it's just that drone, but when you add these effects, that's what creates the rhythm. And this is a good example of taking just one sound that's completely different, and by using certain combination of effects on it, you can really create something that, you know, I mean, I forgot even that that's how I did it, but it's fine. Anyway, so if we were to put those back in, let's go one by one. This is the tremolator. And there's another tremolator here, which is an 8th dot. That's what gives that rhythm. That's the 8th dot on its own. 2 together. There's a bit of EQ to cut the lows and bring out the highs, and then the smack attack, that's to basically improve the transient. And then on top of that, there's an echo boy, which is also important. So those elements all come together and they create that sound. On top of that, there is a piano pattern that's playing as well. It's the only part in the song where piano is featured. I wanted to also bring this piano sound in because it connected with the first track on the record, which is Code. And in Code, it's much more of a prominent element. But by doing this, I found it kind of keeps more cohesion in the album, even just bringing in a sound from another track for a moment. So that sound is here. And it's just, again, a pedal sound. It's just repeating through, and then we get, I mean, it's hinting at the melody that's going to enter. That's the high note in the piano. Da, 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 da. And that comes in with the voice in the drop. So this is the drop. What I wanted to do here is to basically bring back all the elements that are happening. We have the sub bass, we have the kick, the percussion, we have the wind sound. We also have this repeated chord that I just broke down here, the green one, and that I wanted to continue over. So you get this spillage basically of these elements, the new elements, the older elements, everything coming together. On top of that, there is a new melodic idea, which is this this other synth part here. It's this da da, this minor third. So that's hanging over top, and as that's playing, you have the vocals start to creep in, those vocal sounds from before. There's two distinct sections here. There's the first drop and then there's a repeated drop. And what was important for me was how do I make the first drop really hit hard and be satisfying, but to not overdo it so that the second drop feels tired and feels just like a repetition or feels smaller or the same amount of energy. The song needed to keep growing through that second drop. So that was the challenge, especially in the mix of really how to, make it hit hard, but at the same time feel like it's still growing. So those are really all of the elements, I believe, together, except for one other key element here, which is this noise track. And this is a good example of something which you don't really hear, but when it's not there, the track feels very empty. It kind of just fills out the whole sound spectrum to create a real wash. And for this sort of dream poppy influenced track, that's really key. And then obviously that's also sidechain, so the noise is pumping. If you listen to it on its own, it sounds like this. Which sounds intense. And this I did find. I remember when I sent the mix to the mastering engineer, he did a first master, and this really came out, and it felt like the whole thing was just like really, really noisy. So I had to bring it back, but without it, the track sort of felt like it lost its energy, its whole movement as well. So I'll play it without first, and then I'll bring it in to show you what the difference is. And this is with it in. So a really important part for me here, that the most important part in this section, and almost in the song in its entirety, for me was the feeling I wanted to have with the vocal that emerges in here. And it's this kind of female voice that sustains and it cuts through, and then there's the resolution. For me, this had so much emotion to it, so much longing. There was a visual from this film poster that I felt really connected. This girl's face, basically, or like a reflection in water. And I remember just looking at that photograph and playing this section over and over again to make sure that I was getting those goosebumps, at that moment. In the voice. So if I play it in isolation, it'll sound basically like this. But it's coming over this big chord change, right? We're hitting the 4 chord, and so the basically just the shaping of it, the kind of amount of sidechain, the automating of the volume, all of these elements were super important to basically get right. And yeah, if I play it one more time, that's how it sounds. So when the track then returns to the final drop, again, how do we make this, we've done so much, it's so dense. We've sort of heard every element in this track, and we're doing a final repetition before the end of the track. So how do we make it different? How do we make it interesting? Maybe even more satisfying? And I'll just play it quick, and then I'll show you, I guess, sort of what I was trying to do. So what's happening here is I'm bringing back the original vocal sound that came over in this section here, right? You see this whole part here, it's coming back again here. So you get that little reference, an added layer vocally. But then on top of that, there's some other key things I'd point out. So a big thing I was really spending a lot of time on was the settings for the sidechain, and when to have more sidechain, when to have less sidechain. Because when you have a lot of sidechain, it really has that wah, wah, like that really like pumping groove. This one has a lot, this sound. But then there's a sound that comes in here, this other vocal, and this actually has no sidechain. This one, and that's very important that I wanted it to have no sidechain, because it kind of just, it comes through, it sort of just lingers there, and then it falls into the resolution, which then gets sidechained at this note, if you listen to these in isolation. And I really tweaked this a lot, like playing this groove over and over again to just get that right feeling, I really wanted the groove to be there, to be dancey, but I also wanted to, not feel like it was annoying in how much it was pumping. But if it didn't pump enough, then it was maybe like the groove is we're starting to lose it a bit. The other thing that emerges back again here is the male choir, which is another important kind of mid line that supports the higher voice. That's pretty much it. I mean, it takes the track out, and there's a bit of a tail end to it. But yeah, those things all are really important, that they all come together, and there's that new melodic idea as well, the da-da, that whole thing, that really cuts through, and it's quite aggressive if you listen to it on its own, but when it's in the texture, it needs to be that aggressive for it to come through with everything else going on. So that's essentially the full track. I'm gonna do this with some more tracks of mine from this album, and hopefully, you learn something, or there's some interesting things to take away from it. Feel free to put any questions in the comments, and obviously it'd be amazing if you would subscribe. I would really appreciate that. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything at all. I'm an open book here, and I believe that the things we learn are meant to be passed on, and you know, people are meant to pick things up and adapt them and use them as they wish themselves. So that's it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.